Hey everybody, and welcome to my Flash animation videos. My name is Jay Edry, and today we're going to be looking at basic animation techniques. I'm going to be showing you how to do 3 different types of animations. One's going to be a little harder than the other two. For the animations, we're going to be doing a simple ball bounce, and it's kind of like the lesson we did before, but we're going to add a little bit of follow through with it. After that, I'm going to be showing you how to do a look around animation, and we're just going to have a character that looks from the left to the right. And after that, we're going to be doing an animation that's a little bit more tough, but it's a falling animation where the character falls off a cliff and bounces on the ground. So let's get right to it. So go ahead and click your ActionScript 3.0, and for this lesson we're going to be a little bit more careful with our settings. We're going to be changing our frame rate to 30 frames per second. Now you could do that over here under the timeline, or you could do it in the properties area. Now be aware, if you have something else selected, your properties panel will change and you won't be able to access your frame rate. To change it back, just click a blank area under your scene and it should pop back into place. I'm going to be changing my frames per second to 30, and I'm going to be changing my resolution to 800 by 600. The higher your frames per second, the smoother your animation will seem, but going over anything that's 30 is really overdoing it. So now that we have our stage set up, let's center it and create our character using the brush tool. Go ahead and select a black fill color and turn on pressure sensitivity. So once again, we're going to be creating a round character, and if you'd like, you can use the character that you created in the last lesson. Could be giving them some eyes, eyebrows for expression, a nice big happy smile. Now for this lesson, I'm also going to be giving him some hands. These hands are there so we can represent follow through and drag, along with secondary action. If you want, you can give the character something else like hair or ears, but for me, I'm just going to make some arms and maybe some hair, just to add a little bit finesse. Now let's paint my character a sort of dark bluish purple, and it looks like I missed a spot on my eyes, so I'm going to zoom in on there, find the problem area, get my black brush tool, and fill in the problem area, and that should fix the fill problem. So I'm just going to finish up the rest of the character. And sometimes when I color in the character, I like to keep the same colors going on. So I'll select a red and put it on top of another red. And for the arms, I'm going to color them also purple. So I'm just going to grab the same purple that I used before and lighten it up for the hands. And I'll darken that same purple up for the arms. And now I'm done my character. Now we're going to want to add a ground plane for him to jump on. So to do that, go ahead and click your rectangle tool and create a new layer, and on that layer make sure you have it selected and draw a rectangle across the bottom of the screen. Now you can always go ahead and change the color of the rectangle by selecting the fill color and changing it in your fill colors option box. Once you've chosen the color for your ground, go ahead and label your layer ground and drag it under the character so that you can see the character on top of your ground. Let's also go ahead and label our character. Now we know we're never going to be actually manipulating the ground, so let's just go ahead and lock that layer. Using our selection tool, let's highlight the entire character and turn him into a symbol. Now remember, when you turn your character into a symbol, you want to make sure that you give it a name, changing your type to graphic if it's not already, and changing your registration point to the center for this character. Go ahead and click OK. Now we know that the registration point isn't exactly where we want it to be, so double click on the character to go inside of him, select your entire character, and drag him so that the registration point seems like it's right in the center of him, and double click out of it, or click on scene 1 to go out of your character. Now if you use your free transformation tool and rotate him around, it looks like he's spinning pretty okay for now. Let's undo that. Let's also shrink him up a bit so that there's more room for him to jump, and place him back on the ground. Now to deselect your character, you can hit the escape key, or you could also click outside of him. Now there's one more important thing to add to our character that we're going to have to do, and that is looping. If you click your character, and you look on the right over here, you notice that you have your looping option set to loop. You're going to want to change that to single frame. Later in the video I'm going to go into why I did this, but for now just trust me, change it to single frame. Now I want to point out that the method I'm going to use for animating this character is a very simple animation technique. The proper way to animate a character is to break the character down into many symbols and animate each symbol separately. I'm going to be showing you guys how to do that in the next lesson, but for this lesson we're only going to be animating the character as one symbol. Let's add more frames to the character so that we can play around with them. Hitting the F5 key will add frames. Scroll back to your original position and select your character. Instead of just jumping straight ahead and going up and landing back down, we're going to want him to first anticipate jumping and afterwards jump, and then when he lands we're going to want the reaction to his landing. Let's start with the anticipation. Go somewhere later in your timeline, hit F6 to add a keyframe, and what I usually do is I squash the character and stretch him. Now you want to figure out how this new keyframe matches up with the keyframe before it. To do this, you can use the comma and period keys on your keyboard, and that will scroll one frame left and one frame right on your timeline. So go ahead and try that out. Now when he squashes for the anticipation for the takeoff, you'll notice that he goes off the ground. We don't want that. So to do that, we could drag him down a bit and keep scrolling, and that looks pretty good now actually. And I'm going to call that good for now. Now when he takes off, you're going to want to stretch up a bit because now he's jumping up. To do that, what I usually like doing is taking the original frame the character was in so we can maintain his original shape and copying it over to the frame after when he squashes. So to do that, hold the Alt key, click hold on the frame and drag it across to the frame afterwards and let go. Now we have a frame that's a copy of the one we have on the first frame. So now we can use our comma and period keys to see what that looks like. Now you'll notice it takes a long time and many hits of the comma and period keys to go between frames. So what a lot of people do is they actually squash their keyframes so that they're all right next to each other. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Now when we scrub, we can kind of see what's going on. This method of using your comma and period key is also called flipping keys. So for this frame, I know I'm going to want him to stretch up a bit, kind of like he's trying to take off. So let's see what that looks like so far. And you'll notice that his body actually goes through the ground. We're not going to want that. Let's raise him up a bit. And now it seems like he has too much of a mass to his body, so I'm going to make him a little bit thinner. And that looks good. So we're going to consider these first three keys our anticipation keys for the jump. Now let's move on to the actual jump. Create a keyframe on frame 5 just to separate our anticipation keys from the actual jump keys. This is not the key I actually want to use for a character because he seems a little stretched and squashed over here. So I'm going to do what I did before and copy the first frame over to that frame. And now we're left with the character in the original size. So I'm going to drag him up a bit and squash and stretch him so it looks like he's taking off. I'm going to flip through the keys to see how that looks. Not bad. I'm going to have the character move all the way to the top, so go ahead and click on frame 6, create a keyframe, drag him to the top. Now if you want to make sure that he drags straight and not bumping around on the sides, you can hold the shift key and that will lock him to the y-axis if you're dragging on the y-axis. It will also lock him to the x-axis if you're dragging on the x-axis. I'm going to drag him to the top. I'm going to squash him and stretch him kind of so he looks a little bit wide, and that will be his highest most point at his jump. And then when he's coming down, I'm going to squash and stretch him so he looks kind of like the one on frame 5. So I could just copy frame 5 over to the frame after his topmost point. And let's see what that looks like. Not bad. So these three frames represent his actual jump. And now we're going to need a landing. So to start the landing, I'm going to start a keyframe on frame 9 to separate it from the actual jump. Now once again, I don't like this stretched pose because I don't know what his original size was, and I don't want him to start growing and shrinking on me in the scene. So I'm going to go ahead and copy the first frame and place it on top of frame 9 by holding the Alt key and dragging. Now when he lands, I want him to squash a bit. So I'm going to create a keyframe after that and squash him and stretch him. Bring him down so that he's still on the ground, and I think he should be a little bit wider there to maintain the mass that he has. And then I want him to go back to the original shape. So now as you can see, we have 3 keyframes for the takeoff, 3 keyframes for the actual jump, and 3 keyframes for the landing. When you play through, you also might notice that you might not like certain things. For instance, for me, I don't like the squash here. I think it should be a little stronger, so I'm going to squash him a little bit more and drag him down so that he's not off the ground. And I like that a lot better. And there you have it. Now you can also scrub by hold clicking on top of the timeline and dragging on top of the numbers over here you can kind of see what your animation will look like. So now that we're finished with that, let's add some tweening. So we're going to add a bunch of frames after the first frame and the second frame. Now these spaces, we're not actually going to add frames into them because they're going to transition each other directly. So let's add a couple frames after the first frame, the second keyframe, the fourth keyframe, the fifth keyframe, the seventh keyframe, and the eighth keyframe. And for all those little spaces we added earlier to separate the frames, we're actually just going to get rid of those by hitting Shift F5 to remove frame. So we don't want these single spaces that we separated them with earlier. Those were just there to show you guys I'm separating the different animations from each other. Now we notice because we added a couple frames to the character over here, now we push the timeline off over the edge. We don't really need this extra timeline area over here. So we could go ahead and highlight that whole area, hold Shift and hit F5. And that will line up our timeline again so that it matches up with the ground. Now let's select our entire animation, right click, and go to Classic Tween. Scroll to the beginning of the timeline, and let's hit enter to see what it looks like. Not bad. It seems a little bit slow for me, so I'm going to start removing a little bit of frames. Now if you want to remove frames from all the layers of the timeline, instead of having to select the entire timeline, you could just select the area on top of the timeline where the numbers are over here, and hold Shift and hit F5, and that will remove frames for both layers. Let's play that through again. Pretty good. So now I'm going to be adding a little bit of easing. Now there's a lot of animation principles involved in knowing how to ease things. The best way to learn them is just to practice, see what other people do, and learn a few tutorials about them. But I know that when he goes down, he's going to go really fast and slow down, kind of like he's adding anticipation to his jump. So make this animation go fast and slow down. You're going to want to click on that tween and go to ease and select ease out. Now you could change the easing by hold clicking on the number in the ease and dragging left and right. Ease out means that it's going fast to slow, and ease in is going slow to fast. Now I know that this is ease in because when I select anything under 0, like minus 100, this word here changes to in. And if I change anything over, this word over here changes to out. So I want this keyframe to be ease out, this tween to be ease in, this tween to be ease out, this tween to be ease in, and once again ease out, ease in. So in recap, we have out, in, out, in, out, in. And you'll notice that we have all the animations separated from the anticipation of the jump, and the landing of the jump. Let's play it through and see how it looks. Pretty good. Now we don't need all these extra frames, so I'm just going to select them all, hold Shift and hit F5, and play our animation through again. It's pretty good. I kind of like it. Now let's add a little bit more. This character looks a little bit flat because all he's doing is squashing and stretching and no part of his body is actually moving. So let's scroll back to our first frame and go into our character. Now when you go inside of a symbol, you want to make sure that you're on the keyframe of that symbol, or you might accidentally make a keyframe where you least expect it. For instance, if I click over here in our timeline and I double click on our character and go back out, I accidentally created a keyframe where I didn't mean to. So to remove a keyframe, hold Shift and press F6. Scroll on top of somewhere where there is a keyframe for our symbol, and double click him to go in. Now here we could change the character around a bit, so we can add different faces, different hand positions, to make it look more like he's jumping. So to do that, let's add another keyframe right after the current keyframe we have. And in this position, this will be the face that the character makes just before he starts jumping. So you can manipulate the character however you want. I'm going to show you two different ways that you can go ahead and manipulate the hands so that it looks like he's jumping. The first method I'm going to use is using the lasso tool. I'm going to select this arm and drag it up. So it looks like he's trying to take off. For this arm, I could do the same thing as I did on this arm, but I'm just going to go ahead and erase it and draw a brand new arm. Now when I'm coloring this arm, I don't need to go ahead and find the colors inside of my fill color. I know that this arm has the exact same colors as the arm on his right side, so that I can select his arm colors and just fill them in like so. Also, when he's about to take off, I think he wants to look up so that he knows where he's going. So I'm going to select the eye so I could zoom in on it. Using my lasso tool, I could select the eye and drag it up. Now, in the previous lesson, I was talking about how I don't want there to be this yellow fill on top of this black area. And the way I did that was I shift selected that area to inverse the selection in that fill color. Make sure you have your selection tool selected, and then rotate it. Now remember that you can't change your selection using your free transformation tool. You can only change your selections using your selection tool. I'm going to hit I to select this eye color over here and fill it up. For this eye, I'm just going to be erasing the eye and redrawing it on top, just to show you that there are different ways of doing things. So I'm going to select the eyeball color, select my brush tool, increase my brush size, and just draw over the entire eye. Select the black color and redraw the eyeball. Now when I draw the eyeball, I want to make sure that this line that I have for the eyeball is the same thickness as the eyeball I have on this side. This looks a little bit too thick, so I can either let off pressure sensitivity or just change my brush size so it's a little bit smaller. So that looks pretty good. I'm going to stick to that. Next, select the eyeball color from here and fill it up. Zoom out, and that's going to be his anticipation frame. So now in this symbol we have two frames. We have the default standing symbol and we have the anticipating to jump symbol. So go back outside of this symbol, and if you play your animation, you notice that nothing has changed. For each keyframe you created, you can use a different face that you created for that keyframe. I know when he's going down, I want him to already start looking up, starting even from the first frame. So to do that, you can go ahead and select the symbol, and then under the looping options, under first, you can go ahead and type in 2. And what this 2 means is that we're going to be showing the second frame for this character inside of that symbol. So you notice right away that this is the second frame that we created. If we go into the symbol, the first frame would be the standing default frame, the second frame would be the anticipation frame for the jump. So we know that this keyframe is using frame 2 for the anticipation, and we know that this keyframe is still using the first keyframe, which is the default frame. So what happens is the character pops back to his default frame. We don't want that. We want this also to be the anticipation frame. So go ahead and select that frame and change that first to 2. Let's play through our animation. I think we're going to need to zoom out a bit. Play through it again. That's pretty cool. It almost looks like he's punching the ground a little bit when he's jumping. I kind of like it. Now, if you notice that when you play through your animations, we still have this default frame, which is still part of the anticipation frame for the jump. We're going to want to change that also to the second frame. So let's go ahead and click him, change it to 2, and play it through. Now I'm going to want 2 other face shapes for his jump. And that's for the rising and the falling. For the landing, I kind of like the default. So for the rising frame, I can just go ahead and click on a keyframe that symbol is on, go inside of him. Now you'll notice that if you go into the symbol in a squash and stretch frame, now you're going to have to modify the symbol in that squashed and stretched state. You might want to do that, you might not. I'm going to go ahead and do it in the squashed and stretched state. So now let's add another keyframe. Now I'm going to have to modify the character so that his arms are stretched down. Now remember, I have 2 other frames to pick from that I can use to modify to create the third keyframe. So for this keyframe, I'm going to copy the same keyframe that's on frame 2 because he's already looking up, and that helps me out a bit. So make sure you have the third keyframe selected, and this will be the rising keyframe. So I know for the rising, I want his hands to kind of dangle down because he's going up pretty quick. So to do that, I'm just going to go ahead and erase these other 2 arms. Using my brush tool, making sure I have black selected as my fill color, I'm going to draw the 2 arms pointing straight down. Also, I'll notice his hair. I kind of want his hair to kind of dangle down too, because all the wind is blowing really heavily downwards towards him. Just going to erase his hair and draw a little dangly bit going down like so. Now to color the 2 arms, I don't have to guess what they used to be, because I know the other 2 frames I have over here have the original colors. So I could just go ahead and hit the eye tool to select one of the colors, and go back to the third keyframe and color them in. Let's go outside of our symbol. And now change this keyframe, which is part of the rising keyframe, to be the third frame. Remember that when you want to change the frames, you have to be on top of your keyframe. You can't do it in between the keyframes if you have a tween, which is very similar to when you want to go inside of the symbol. You want to make sure that you're on top of that keyframe. So let's play it through. It's pretty good. Now I also want a different frame for the falling. So to change it up a bit, I'm going to change that falling keyframe on the first frame so that he's in his original unstretched, unsquashed state. Let's go into that symbol. I think for the falling, the frame that looks best is, I'm going to go with the second frame because his hands are kind of already up. So I'm going to click the second frame, hold Alt, and click drag that on top of the fourth frame. So now we have a frame for the default frame, the anticipation frame for the jump, the rising frame, and the falling frame, which you haven't created yet. And for the falling frame, I think you might want to look down because you want to see where he's going to land. So to do that, I'm going to zoom in on the eyeball. And just because I know that my character's eyes are perfectly round, I can just select the whole eyeball and just rotate it all. Now I do have some white area over here, which I can fill in with the face color. Some people don't have perfectly round eyeballs, so they can use some of the other techniques I used, such as erasing the eyeball and redrawing on the bottom. But I'm going to use the lasso selection tool to just select the eyeball and rotate it around and drag it down. And also remember to fill in this color. Now we missed a bit of the eyeball over here, and we know that that should probably be black, so let's go ahead and select some of the black color and fill in that eyeball that we missed. Zoom out. That's pretty good. Now I want my character to be a little bit funnier, so I'm going to make the hands kind of waving as he's falling. So I'm just going to go ahead and erase this hand. Using my brush tool, I'm going to draw a hand that's kind of open and pointing upwards. Color it in. That's a pretty cool hand, but sometimes it might take me a long time to draw this hand. And I know that I need to redraw it over here, so I could just go ahead and select this whole arm, delete it, select this whole arm, copy and paste it, drag it across. We could just flip this hand over to its mirror form. So to do that, we go to Modify, Transform, Flip Horizontally. Drag it so it's lined up properly, click outside of the character, and it's saved. So now we have default pose, anticipation to the jump, the rising, the falling, and when he lands we know we want the default pose. So let's go out of the symbol, go to the falling area. Now I want him to start falling around this frame because I know this is the keyframe that would probably work best. So to do that, make sure you're on top of the keyframe, select the character, and I think the falling was on frame 4, and that looks pretty good. Now don't forget that he's still falling on this frame that's kind of left alone over here. So we go ahead and select it, select the character, and change our first to 4. And let's play it through and see how it looks. Hey, that looks pretty good. Now don't forget, you're not stuck with the frames you originally created. You can also go ahead and change the face frames to match whatever you'd like to do. So now I notice that when he falls, I want his hair, dangly hair bit to kind of go up more, so it looks like he's falling. So I'm going to go back into the character by selecting one of the keyframes, double clicking on him, go into the falling area, which is right here. I'm going to erase that hair, and now he's moving down so quickly that I'm going to make his hair just completely straight. It untangled as he's falling down. And go back out. Let's see if that works out. You know what? I don't like it. It pops too much. I'm going to go back into him, erase the hair, and make it look similar, but with a dangly bit. That's pretty good. Now you can go ahead and play with this character and play with the animations as much as you want and be as creative as you want. I'm going to go ahead and talk about the properties area when you select the character under looping. Now if you remember, I was talking about single frame and how you want it to be on single frame. What single frame means is that it's only going to play frame 2. If we had it set to loop, it will play frames 1 to 4 starting at frame 2. So it'll play frame 2, 3, 4, then go back to frame 1 and play it through again. So 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. If I play through just that one area that I changed the looping to loop, you'll notice that he does this little hand wave just before he jumps, which is not what I wanted. And that's why it's very important that when you have your characters created and rigged, you want to make sure that his options loop is set to single frame. What play once is it will play from frame 2 to the last frame of that symbol, and it'll just stick to the last frame after it's done. So know that the last frame is frame 4, and frame 4 is when his hands are up. So if we have it just play once, what's going to happen is it's just going to play through once, and once it's on that frame, it's going to play through until it reaches the next keyframe. So let's try that and see what happens. So as you can see, when I scrub through, he's stuck on that last frame, and when he goes to the next keyframe, it plays properly like the way I do want it to play. I'm going to select the character and change it back to single frame, and that's it. Let's go ahead and save this animation and export it out. Great, so I have this animation saved, so if I ever need it again, I'm not going to lose it. Now we're going to make our second animation, but I'm just going to use the exact same character that we used in our previous animation, since we already know he's rigged in the scene. So the first thing I want to do is resave this animation as a different name, so that we don't accidentally overwrite our jumping animation. So let's hit File, Save As. I'm going to change this file to Look, and hit Save. Now we know we have our jump animation saved safely away from our look animation. Now for our look animation, we're not going to be needing any of these frames. Let's go ahead and just delete all the animations by selecting them all, holding Shift and pressing F6. Now we have all our animations gone, we can start from scratch. But we already have our character created. How do we get him back? The way we're going to do that is going into our library. To find the library, hit Windows and look for Library. Click that, and you can see we have our symbol created right over here. You can just drag your symbol guy over, and there he is. Now we don't need the library open for the rest of this example, so we can go ahead and close it off. You can use this little key over here to minimize it into this icon over here. We're not going to be needing a ground layer for this example, so let's go ahead and select it and delete it. So now we have our character selected. But what's wrong with it? If you look carefully, your looping options is set up to loop. You know we don't want that already because we want to stick to the frames that we created. So you always got to make sure when you start your scene, your whole character is set to looping options single frame. Now a big problem that you can run into if you don't have your looping options set to single frame, let's say I set it to loop and I start working on my animations. I start creating a bunch of keyframes here and here and here. Now I have all these keyframe animations and I didn't notice that my looping options was set to loop. Now the problem I'm facing with is I'm going to have to go to each keyframe that I created and change that back to single frame. And that can be very tedious and very annoying and can cause a lot of problems along the way. So make sure that when you start off your scene that you have your looping options set up to single. That way you won't have to go through all the problem of fixing your animation later. And now we're starting our new scene. We have our character set up, our registration points in the center, he is a symbol, and our looping options is set up to single frame. And notice because we dragged the character from our library, he's still the same character we love and has all our keyframes right in there. Now for the face turn, I'm going to take out his arms because they might cause a little bit of problems, but feel free to leave them in if you want a bit of a challenge. So I'm going to create a new frame where he's looking left and another frame where he's looking right. So I'm going to double click on our character to go into that symbol. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so I have a clearer view of him. Make a copy of the first frame, put it right at the end. So now we have a new keyframe. This keyframe will be look left, and I'm going to just remove the arms to make things a little bit easier. I'm going to select my selection tool, click the eyebrow, then shift select the eyeball color, the eyeball, and the line that's surrounding the eyeball and the eyeball color. And now I have the whole eye selected. To make things a little bit easier, I'm just going to drag it outside of the character really quickly, fill in this empty space with the purple color, turn this eye around because I know that we're looking the other way. Now remember, you could also draw the eye looking the other way. Select the whole eyeball, bring it back to around here, and if you want you could squash it a bit to kind of look like it's going around this ball and not a flat area. So now I have the one eye kind of done. He looks kind of lopsided right now, but let's move this eye over. Now this purple area I'm going to fill in with the purple color. And the mouth. Once again I'm going to hit the V key to use my selection tool and select all the parts of the mouth, using the shift key to select multiple items. And hitting Q to free transformation it and move it over. So now we can kind of see if it looks like he's turning left, and it looks like his eyeballs are moving a little bit down. But that's okay for now because this is just a quick example. When you're doing your own example, I would suggest taking more care in your work. So this will be our character looking left, and let's make our character looking right. To make our character looking right, we're just going to take our whole character, go to Modify Transform, and go to Flip Horizontally. So what I did was copy the keyframe from frame 5 onto frame 6 and just flipped it. So now we have a look left and look right on frame 5 and 6. Let's zoom out and go out of our scene. I want our looking animation to be about 40 frames long. So go ahead and hold Shift and press F5 to remove all the access frames. Now we know on the first frame we want him looking left, so we're going to change our first to 5. And our last frame we're going to make him look right, which is on frame 6. And what we're also going to do is we're going to make him move his head really quick from left to right as he's looking from left to right. So let's just put a tween on there right away and see how that looks. So that doesn't look that great. You know, it kind of looks like it's popping. It just looks like he's looking left the whole time, and just at the last frame he flips to the right. So what we need to do, kind of like what we did for the jump, is we're going to have to create two different sections for the look. The look left leading towards the look right, and then the look right. So we're going to have a look left section moving quickly towards the look right, and then the look right section to finish it off. So I'm going to create two frames right in the center, select the head on the second keyframe that we created, and change that to frame 6. Hit play, and let's see how it looks. It kind of looks okay. Now what the problem is you'll notice that there's a pop over here, right in the center of our animation. We don't want that pop to happen. So to prevent that pop, what we want to do is kind of make the character start moving his head really quickly, and in that quick area, that pop will happen, and that will help it kind of disappear. So let's try that out. So let's make our character start slow from frame 1, and start speeding up as it reaches the center. And then from the center it's going to go really quickly and start slowing down as it reaches our last frame. And that might get rid of that pop that's right in the center. Let's select the tween for the look left, and change that to ease in. So it'll go from slow to fast. And for our second tween, I want an ease out. So the character will go slow, fast, fast, slow. And if you play through, you'll notice that it doesn't look as bad as before. So we're going to have to add a little bit of space by moving the left looking face to the left and the right looking face to the right, by selecting the keyframes and moving them over, and playing it through again. That looks a lot better. The faster that the character is moving during the transition, the smoother that the animation will look and look less poppy. So I'm going to remove a few frames to make that head turn go a little bit quicker, and play it through again. Not bad. Also, if you want to smooth that out a little bit more, what you could do is you can add a face looking right at you for the frame right in between the two. So let's go ahead and click F6 to create a keyframe in that area. Go back into our face and use a default face. Add it to frame 7. Remove the arms. And make sure we change our keyframe to frame 7. And now what we have is we have the character looking from the left. We have a little padding of him looking at the center, and then he looks to the right. This looking technique is the same technique I use for almost all my animations. In future lessons you'll see more examples of this and probably get a better hang of it. So I'm going to go ahead and save this animation and export it out. And make sure when you save it and you export it that you don't accidentally overwrite your old files. So now let's move on to our final animation. This animation will be called Cliff Bounce. So once again, go ahead and save this animation out as a different name so you don't accidentally override your look animation. I'm going to be naming it Cliff Bounce. And hit save. And now that we have our file saved, we can go ahead and delete all the frames here. Remove all the tweens so we start from scratch. And now we're going to just change our face to frame 7. This is going to be the only frame of the face we're going to be animating. Let's shrink him down so he's pretty small and put him on top. Now keep in mind this is going to be an advanced animation technique and will be used only for special cases. The reason for this technique is to show you that you can embed symbols inside of symbols, and each symbol will have its own animation playing independently of itself. So for this animation we're going to want our face to be rather small and to the side. And for the ground layer, I'm just going to be drawing out freehand, but feel free to use the box tool if you like. This will be the ground setup that we'll be using for our animations. I'm going to lock my ground layer so I don't accidentally modify it, and I can only select our face layer. So for this lesson, we're going to be animating this ball, and what we're going to be making him do is we're going to make him bounce from the top of this cliff down to the ground, hit the ground, bounce up, and make smaller bounces until it reaches the end. We're going to be using a special technique to do this, which is embedding animations inside of animations. So we're going to have one animation of the character just moving from one side to the other, and then inside of that animation we're going to have another animation of the character just spinning, and then separately we're also going to have another animation of the character just bouncing up and down. And altogether that'll create the effect of the ball going off the cliff, hitting the ground, and bouncing as it's rolling. So let's get started. So the first thing we want to do is we want to make sure there are symbols inside of symbols inside of symbols. Now we know we're going to need one symbol for the character moving from left all the way to the right, another symbol for the character bouncing up and down, and another symbol of the character spinning around. So altogether that will add up to 3 symbols. So let's go ahead and turn that character into a symbol. So this symbol will be called roll. Make sure they have graphics set up for type and registration point in the center. Click OK. Let's turn this character into a symbol again. This symbol will be called move right. And we're going to make another symbol again from that symbol. And this symbol will be called bounce. So now if we go into our character, you'll notice now that we're in our scene 1, which is our main scene, inside our bounce symbol. If we go into our character again, now we're in scene 1, inside our bounce, inside our move right. And if we go into it again, we're inside our scene 1, bounce, move right, and now we're in the roll symbol. And if we go into the character again, now we're in the layer that we created all our face shapes. So let's just go out of that. I'm going to be starting off with our move right symbol. So now we're inside our move right symbol, and we know that because we're in our scene 1 bounce, and the last symbol to be displayed is our move right symbol. And I'm going to be finding out how long it's going to take my character to move from left to right. I'm going to estimate about 90 frames. So I'm going to go to frame 90, hit F5. In that frame, I'm going to go ahead and click F6 to create a keyframe on the last frame. And with my character selected and holding shift, I'm going to drag him all the way to the right. I'm holding shift so that the character stays on the x-axis. So now we have frame 1, which he is all the way on the left, and frame 90, which he is all the way on the right. We're going to click the center there and turn that to a classic tween and hit play. It seems pretty long, but I kind of like it. Now what I'm going to want him to do is slow down as he's moving right, because he's going to be hitting the floor and there is friction involved. So I'm going to be clicking the tween and going to ease out. So he's going to be moving from fast to slow. Now if we go back to our scene 1 and hit play, you'll notice that nothing happens. That's because when I go into our character, you notice it's only playing frame 1, which is not what we wanted. We wanted to play up to frame 90. So go ahead and go to frame 90 and hit F5. Now if you hit play, you notice our bounce layer is playing our rotation layer. So we go back into that symbol on frame 1. So now we have the character going from left to right. We know that while he's falling off the cliff and he's hitting the ground, we also want him to spin. So we're going to go into our character, in our roll symbol. We're going to animate our character just rolling. So what some people might do is they might click the first frame and drag across all the way to, let's say, frame 30. Take our character, hit the Q key to go to the free transform tool, and rotate around 360, turn that to classic tween, and press play. Now that doesn't do anything. The reason it doesn't do anything is because our character isn't actually rolling. What it's doing is it's going for the shortest distance from this frame to the last keyframe. And since those two keyframes are pretty much exactly the same, it's not actually going to spin. So what we're going to have to do is in the center area, create a keyframe where he's upside down. And if you play it now, you'll notice the character kind of spins halfway and spins back. To fix that, we're going to have to add another keyframe here, where the character is actually looking the opposite direction. So if we hit play now, it kind of works. I'm also going to add a keyframe over here just for good measure. So now we have the character spinning, and we're under the roll symbol. If we go back out to the move right symbol, you'll notice that now when the player is moving right, he's also spinning, which is kind of what we want. Now you can go in and make sure that the spin slows down as we reach the end, but we're not going to go into that right now. We're just going to leave it as is because it looks okay. Now let's go out of that symbol into our bounce symbol. Now if we play our bounce symbol, we notice we have everything moving except for him falling down off the cliff and bouncing up and down. So now I'm going to animate him falling off the cliff, so we know he falls off the cliff around frame 5. So I'm going to hit a keyframe on frame 5, which is the last frame where he's going to be on top of the cliff. And I know he's going to fall around frame, let's say, 13. I'm going to create a keyframe there. So now that I've made a keyframe on frame 13, I could drag him down to the ground, and I know that's when he's going to be hitting the ground. Now I know that the first jump is going to be a big jump, so it's going to take a long time to reach the second jump. So I'm going to hit a keyframe over on frame 30. The jump after that is going to be a little bit smaller, so I'm going to hit a keyframe on frame 43. And once again, the jump after that is going to be smaller, so I'm going to hit a keyframe on frame 52. And the last jump is going to be super small. I'm just going to hit a keyframe on frame 59. And from there, he's just going to stay on the ground and roll to the end. So now I'm just going to select everything in our timeline and hit tween. And you'll notice that right here at the end, there are a bunch of dots showing that you don't really need a tween over here because there's nothing to tween to. So I can right click it and go to remove tween over there. Let's play it through. So now we have our character rolling off the cliff, and as soon as he rolls off the cliff, he's going down and hitting the ground around frame 13. So now we want the character to bounce up until he hits the next time on frame 30. So right in the center between frame 13 and frame 30, I'm going to create a keyframe and drag him up. So if we play through now, we have him bouncing once, and then he hits the ground and he rolls. So we're going to want to do that for all the times where he's going to bounce. So we're going to put a keyframe right between frame 30 and frame 43. F6. This bounce would be a little bit lower. And a keyframe between frame 43 and 52. Raise him up only slightly. And the last keyframe over here between frames 52 and 59. And for this one, we're going to lift him up ever so slightly. Now keep in mind you could also use the arrow keys to move him up or down. If you want to move him a little bit quicker using the arrow keys, you can hold shift and press up or down. And that will move him directly on the Y or X axis. Let's play our animations. It looks kind of good, but it's jerking up and down as it's bouncing. The reason for that is because we need an ease out and ease in to make it look like gravity is affecting the character and not that it's moving straight up and as soon as it hits the top it just moves straight down. We're going to want an ease in when he's falling off the cliff because gravity does take time to take effect. And now for every tween after that we're going to want an ease out, ease in, ease out, ease in, ease out, ease in, all the way till we reach the end. And let's play it through. So I like our animation, but once again, you could fix it to your liking. I think the first bounce is a little high for me. So I'm going to take that first bounce, click on the keyframe where he's at his highest point, and drag it down a little bit. Now let's play it through. And I think that looks pretty good. I'm going to go out of our scene. And I'm going to fill in our ground. And the reason I didn't fill it in earlier is so that you could see kind of the white outline for our scene. I'm going to fill it in with a red. Go ahead and click File and save it as Cliff Bounce. And that's it. That's the end of our lesson. So thanks everyone for watching. I hope you learned something new in this video and happy animating.